I never planned on falling for the man who could get me killed. But when he whispered my name in that dark alley, drenched in rain and fear, I knew I'd either save Heim or die trying. The night I met Ethan Cade wasn't in some cafe or at a friend's party. It was behind a seedy bar in the backstreets of downtown Seattle, where the neon signs sputtered like dying stars and the air smelled of wet asphalt. I was there chasing a story, my camera hidden under my jacket, my press badge tucked away so deep it might as well not exist. In my world, being known could get you shot. He emerged from the shadows like something out of a spy movie, tall, sharp-jawed. A man who looked like he'd broken more bones than he'd ever set foot in a hospital for. His dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that didn't ask for permission. "You're Tyler Brooks?" His voice was low, urgent. I froze. "Depends who's asking." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his breath warm against the side of my face as he pressed a small flash drive into my palm. It was slick from the rain, but heavier than it should have been, like it carried the weight of something that could destroy more than just reputations. "That has names," he said. "Bad people. And now they'll be after you too." I wanted to laugh at the melodrama of it, but something about the way he said it, the way his voice broke ever so slightly, told me this wasn't a game. The flash drive burned in my pocket for days after that. And so did his name, Ethan Cade. He was an alpha, though I didn't know it then. All I knew was that every few days, I'd get another envelope under my apartment door or an unmarked text telling me where to look. Corrupt cops, dirty politicians, deals so big they could warp the city's spine. I ran the stories, my editor thinking I was just some obsessive workaholic with a knack for being in the right place at the right time. But there was always that undercurrent, his shadow in the crowd, the faint smell of gunpowder and cedarwood, the way his eyes scanned every room like he was measuring the distance to the exits. I didn't see him often, but when I did, it was like standing too close to a fire. It wasn't until 3 months in that I realized he wasn't just feeding me storyish, was bleeding for them. The night it all broke open was a Tuesday, the kind of cold where your breath feels like shards of glass in your throat. I had just wrapped up an interview with a whistleblower in an old motel when the power went out. The hum of the vending machine died, and silence settled like a predator. I turned toward the window and there he was, Ethan. But this wasn't the same controlled, untouchable man I'd seen before. His black jacket was torn, his lips split, blood staining the side of his temple. And in his eyes, God, in his eyes there was something I'd never seen before. "Tyler," he breathed, stepping inside before I could say anything. He closed the door behind him, locking it twice. "What happened?" My voice cracked. "They know. About me. About you. I don't have long." And then, before I could even process the fear, his hands were on my shoulders, grounding me. The air between us shifted, not just danger now, but something rawer, something hungrier. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he said, his forehead almost touching mine. "You're the only one I can trust." It was stupid. I should have told him to leave, should have thrown that flash drive back in his face and walked away. But instead, I reached up and cupped his jaw, feeling the roughness of his stubble under my thumb. "You're safe here," I said, even though I knew that wasn't true. Not anymore. For the next 48 hours, my apartment became a war room. Ethan barely slept, pacing like a caged wolf, always with one hand near the gun strapped under his jacket. I caught glimpses of the alpha in him, the way his presence filled a space, the quiet dominance in every movement. But there were cracks in the armor. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him on the phone, voice low, speaking to no one I could identify. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me, his gaze lingering a little too long. I wasn't blind. I knew the Omega in me was reacting to him, body drawn to his in ways I didn't want to think about. But this wasn't the time for that, or so I told myself. It all came to a head on the third night. I was at my desk, trying to piece together the last story he'd given me, when I felt him behind me. Not just close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath on my neck. "Tyler," he murmured, and something in his voice made my pulse jump. "If I don't make it through this, I need you to know." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he rested his hands on either side of my chair, boxing me in. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "I'm not letting you die," I said, more fiercely than I expected. "Not for me, not for them. You hear me?" His lips curved, not quite a smile, but something softer, something dangerous. "Then I guess we're in this together." And just like that, I knew there was no turning back. The morning after that tense, almost confession, we woke to the sound of tires screeching outside. I didn't need Ethan to tell me what it meant. My body already knew. Adrenaline hit like a tidal wave. "They found us," Ethan said, his voice razor-sharp now, all the softness from last night buried under the Alpha's armor. We didn't have time to pack. He shoved the flash drive into my jacket pocket, his eyes locking onto mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "No matter what happens, get this to the drop point. If they get me, they won't." I cut in, my chest aching with the weight of what I was about to risk. The door shook with the first blow. Ethan grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the fire escape. We clattered down 3 flights, the metal cold under my hands. But as soon as our feet hit the alley, a black SUV screeched around the corner. Ethan drew his gun. I had never seen him like this, eyes narrowed, every line in his body taut with lethal precision. The men coming out of the SUV were armed, faces hidden under masks. The first shot rang out, ricocheting off the dumpster beside us. Ethan shoved me behind cover, returning fire with terrifying efficiency. But there were too many, and none of them got close enough to grab me. "Tyler!" Ethan's roar ripped through the chaos. He lunged, slamming into the man holding me, sending us both sprawling. My hands scraped the concrete, but I was free. We ran. Through alleys, over fences, ducking through the back doors of restaurants that smelled of frying oil and spices. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but Ethan never let go of my hand. When we finally burst into the abandoned warehouse where the drop point was supposed to be, I realized there was no one waiting. The silence pressed down like a weight. "They've got to be here," I said, panic clawing up my throat. "They knew you'd come," a voice said from the shadows. A man stepped forward, one I recognized from the files Ethan had given me. A government handler supposedly on our side. But his smile told me everything I needed to know. "You've been leaking to a reporter," he said to Ethan, almost lazily. "And now you're both liabilities." It happened fast. The handler raised his gun. Ethan stepped in front of me, his body shielding mine completely. I could feel the heat of him, the steady thrum of his heartbeat against my chest. But before the handler could pull the trigger, a shot rang out from the rafters. The man crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. From above, a figure waved another agent, one of Ethan's few remaining allies. "Move!" he shouted. The extraction was a blur, hands dragging us into a van, city lights streaking past as we sped into the night. Only when the adrenaline started to ebb did I realize Ethan's arm was around me, holding me like he might never let go. "You're safe now," he said, though his voice trembled. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had handed me the first flash drive like a death sentence, who had kept me alive through every ambush and betrayal, who had stood in front of a gun for me without hesitation. "You're safe too," I whispered back. And in the dim light of that van, he leaned in slowly, almost like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't. Our lips met, and for the first time in weeks, there was no fear. Just heat, and the steady, unshakable knowledge that we'd made it through. Months later, we were living in a small coastal town far from Seattle, the sea air sharp with salt and promise. I was still writing, still chasing stories, but now Ethan was beside me, not as a source, not as a fugitive, but as something much more dangerous and much more precious. Some nights, when the wind rattled the windows, I'd wake to find him watching me with that same intensity from the night we met. I'd ask him what he was thinking, and he'd always give the same answer. "That I never thought I'd get out alive," he'd say. Then he'd kiss me, and I'd feel his heart against mine, steady and certain. And every time, I'd remember the rain, the flash drive, and the moment I decided without knowing the cost that I'd be his only way out. Only now I realized he had been mine too. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.